VIP event before the main dinner here, and we've got some special guests. I'm going to let my brother Roger Wood take over here and run this part of it.
Thank you all for coming today. Can you hear me okay? We have some very special people that's come all over the country. We have people come from New Zealand, Iowa, Texas, and Mississippi, and probably even more than that. And Alaska, yes. And so we have people that are concerned about their kids and their grandkids' future. And I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart because we're all in this fight together. And we have a new organization we're kicking off this time called the Kansas Chamber of Liberty. And it's a political action committee, and we're really excited about it. We think we can, the status quo has been taking us down some rat holes, and we want to stop that. And we'll do the best we can. But we have some special guests here. Trevor Loudon is an author, research specialist. He and his wife Victoria have been researchers for Glenn Beck, and he's been a political activist and a fighter against socialist tactics his whole career. And so at this time, I'd like to turn over Trevor Loudon.
Thank you, Roger. Look, thanks very much for having me here. Can everybody hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
You can understand the real southern accents? Look,
South Pacific.
If you can find one, folks. I do go on. But look, I was in San Francisco. I was in Los Angeles recently, and I went up to a street vendor and I bought some food on the side of the street. And the guy asked me, he said, "You've got an accent. Where are you from?" I said, "Well, I'm from New Zealand." He said, "Well, where's that?" And I said, "Well, it's down by Australia." He said, "Where Arnold Schwarzenegger comes from." So this guy votes people. That's the problem, he votes. So how informed is he? But look, I've been touring around this country for the last 4 years. Some of my books are available out there, and I hope you all get them because these are about knowing your enemy. And America's main enemies these days are internal. ISIS, Russia are problems, but your biggest problems are in the Capitol and the Senate. Now, people always say to me, "Why do I care about the United States? Why do I come here so much?" And I say there are two reasons. The first is simple gratitude. Now, my country was saved from invasion in World War II by the Japanese Imperial Army, by the massive sacrifice of your fathers and uncles and grandfathers at the battles of Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea and Midway. You saved us, guys, and we remember that. The second reason is related, but it's a bit more selfish. Ronald Reagan had it right. This is the last best hope for mankind. If freedom should fail in the United States, if you lose your constitution, your liberty, your economic dynamism, and your military superiority, all of which are in grave danger, the bad guys of this planet, I'm talking Russia, China, Iran, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Iran, and their radical Islamic allies, and they are allies, people, they will carve up this planet amongst themselves. And you see that unfolding right before our eyes right now. And if you're an ally of America right now, if you're Israel or Canada or Germany or Australia, you're freaking out because you see that the leadership of this country loves the bad guys a lot more than they love the good guys. That's causing big instability, folks. Your allies look at you and they look at your president. His first act of office was to cancel the missile shield that was supposed to protect the Czech Republic and Poland from the Russians. Then they saw him abandon Georgia to the Russians. Then when there was a genuine rebellion in Iran against the mullahs that could have stopped Iran in its tracks, Obama did nothing. let the bad guys stay in power. And then when your ally Mubarak was facing off against the Muslim Brotherhood and the Communist Party of Egypt, Obama cheered the bad guys on, took out your ally. And now they're looking at the Ukraine, folks. You need to remember what Napoleon said about the Ukraine. Whoever controls the Ukraine controls Europe. Whoever controls Europe controls the world. These are big stakes we are playing for here, folks. If you don't stop Putin now, you'll be fighting him in the future, and he's going to be a lot stronger. The Ukraine has a treaty signed in your Senate under Bill Clinton, guaranteeing that country American protection in the event of Russian military aggression. They gave up their entire nuclear arsenal in exchange for an American promise, folks. And now that they need it, where is it? So far, Obama has sent them a few $100 million of non-lethal aid and John Kerry.
Where didn't they keep him?
Who is John Kerry? He's basically Jane Fonda with less testosterone. That's a good line. So y'all have to add that. Thank you. So you're in a situation, folks, where the bad guys are on the march, where Putin is trying to re-establish the old Soviet empire. China is building 400 nuclear submarines. Iran is on the verge of nuclear weapons. ISIS is committing unimaginable atrocities in Syria and Iraq. And this is the time your president thinks it's appropriate to cut your military. Obama has abandoned Reagan's doctrine of peace through strength, folks. And what happens to your peace when you lose your strength? Obama wants to put your army back to pre-World War I levels, your navy back to pre-World War II levels. He's cutting weapon systems right, left and centre, purging the military of good officers, destroying the morale of the military. And your enemies are on the march, folks. Do you think Putin would be doing what he's doing? Do you think China would be doing what they're doing? Do you think ISIS would be doing what it's doing if you had a Reagan in the White House today? Well, the world is on the verge of major war, folks, because this country has twice elected an anti-American president. And that's big consequences, folks, because I'll tell you straight, if you go down this path much further, the whole Western world is going to crumble, folks. There ain't nowhere to run, because if there was, I would be there. This is the front line for liberty, folks. And just as people, your guys, went to Europe in World War II to sort out their mess, now anybody who loves freedom has to come to America now to try and help you get through this crisis. And it is a crisis, folks. Now the thesis of my books, and my books are pretty big, people, but you keep electing a lot of commies. Sorry about that, but that's what you do. This is about knowing your enemies. That book profiles 51 members of your House and 14 of your senators who wouldn't pass an FBI security check to work in the post office. Yet they're on the Armed Services Committee, the Intelligence Committee, they're on the Homeland Security Committee. They're doing your country down every day, folks, and nobody's calling them out. And that's what the book's about, and that's what my upcoming movie will be all about. But the thesis of the book is very simple. See, the method the Marxists have used to infiltrate your country is control of the labour unions. And you were very lucky for a long time because your unions were controlled by hardcore anti-communists like Lane Kirkland and George Meany. They kept the Reds out of the unions, folks. But in 1995, it all changed. The most significant political event in your country in 20 years, and you never heard a word about it. That was the year that Democratic Socialists of America and the Communist Party USA, maybe 10,000 members between them, that was the year they took over the AFL-CIO, the unions. They kicked out Lane Kirkland, they put their man John Sweeney in as president, and now they own every major union in your country, folks. And what happens if you own the unions, folks? That means you own the Democratic Party. You tell me one Democrat in this country, from county commission to federal level, who does not owe his job to the unions. For money, for manpower, for get out the vote, for vote fraud. It's the unions who do it for them, folks. 10,000 communists have taken over your unions, and by that they have taken over the Democratic Party and they are dictating its policies. The process is very simple. The communists set a policy. This is what we want for America. They make it union policy, and the unions make it Democratic Party policy. Normalization of relations with Cuba, green jobs, cap and trade, card check, Obamacare, normalization of relations with Cuba, as I said, New START treaty with Russia, Iran deal. Every one of those policies started out in the communist movement, they became union policy, and then they became democratic policy. Now I want to talk about the one that I think is the most dangerous, and this is a conference about sovereignty. I want to talk about amnesty, comprehensive immigration reform. Now you have Republicans, inverted comma Republicans, who tell you that amnesty is going to be good for the GOP. Because if you give 8 or 10 or 20 million illegals citizenship or voting rights, they're all going to be so darn grateful, they'll all become staunch Republicans, right? It's just delusional. We know that the Latinos, who are the bulk of the illegals, are often very socially conservative, good Christian people. But they vote 80 to 90% Democrat. They do now, and they will do for many years, folks. So why do these Republicans tell you this garbage? Could it be connected in any way to the fact that the US Chamber of Commerce has spent more than $1.7 billion promoting amnesty in the last 10 years?
Yeah.
What do you think the Chamber wants out of it, guys? Is it hard to guess? Cheap labour. Cheap labour. See, they're all about profit, and I believe in profit. But there's ethical profit and there's unethical profit. Ethical profit is when you make a profit and you pay your own costs. The costs of amnesty are the destruction of your border integrity, the massive lowering of respect for the rule of law in your land, the bankruptcy and impoverishment of communities all over this country, the massive endangerment of your national security, and the end of America. They are big costs, folks. Who's going to pay them? You are. So the Chamber makes the profits and you pay the costs. Is that ethical business, people? No. I don't think so. But the real driver of amnesty, I'm going to say this straight out, is the communist movement. That's where it started. Bert Corona, Communist Party member from California in the 50s, he set up a whole network through the southern border states of support groups for illegals to encourage them across the border, get them citizenship, voting rights, blend them into your culture. Now, Corona trained a whole bunch of disciples to carry on his work for him. Any refugees from California here today? No. Cowboy, you tell me if I'm wrong, sir. 3 people led this, all disciples of Corona. Antonio Villagrosa, until recently the mayor of Los Angeles, a hardcore Marxist. He used to go down to Cuba to cut sugarcane for the Castros. He turned Los Angeles into a sanctuary city. He forbade the LAPD from enforcing immigration laws, and the illegals flooded in the hundreds of thousands. Second member, Gil Cedillo, a Communist Party supporter, until recently the head of the California State Senate. He is the man who got the DREAM Act pushed through in California, and now he's the man leading the charge to give driver's licenses to illegals so they can vote. Signing up tens of thousands of them. Third member of this little Marxist coterie, Maria Elena Durazzo, until recently the head of the California AFL-CIO. She is behind the massive union-driven and union-paid-for Latino voter registration drives and get out the vote efforts that have put hundreds of thousands of new Latino voters onto the California rolls in the last 15 years. Almost all of them Democrats. The result of this deliberate Marxist program has been to turn California from a reddish-purplish state to solidly blue. Now all of the electoral college votes from your most populous state go straight to the Democrats every presidential election cycle. Hugely important, folks. But the man who's leading the charge today is a man called Eliseo Medina. You've seen him on TV wearing a purple shirt, leading an amnesty rally. He is the man behind the amnesty bill that went through your Senate. He tried to get it through the House. Former leader of SEIU, a member of Democratic Socialists of America, and a hardcore Marxist. He is the man Obama consults every time he does something on immigration. Obama boasts about this. He is the man. Now I just want to ask, this might be a dumb question here, any former or current union members in the room tonight? Not trying to persecute you, just ask, you think about this. Which organisation in this country 25 years ago was the most hardcore anti-illegal immigrant? Which organisation was constantly lobbying Congress to increase penalties on any employer caught employing illegals? AFL-CIO. Because they understood that illegals were bad for union members and would drive wages and conditions down. So who is leading the charge to legalise the illegals today, folks? It's the unions. Why the change? Because 25 years ago, the unions were there to protect the interests of their members. Now that they're taken over by Democratic Socialists of America and the Communist Party USA, their agenda is to promote Marxist revolution. To hell with the workers, people. We don't care about your jobs. We don't care about your conditions. We just want revolution. And it took Eliseo Medina 5 years of hardcore lobbying inside the AFL-CIO to get them to flip their policy from anti-illegal to pro-illegal, which he achieved at their national convention in Louisiana in 2000, folks. The Marxists did it. But the real question is this: why does he want this? And why did Obama grant executive amnesty just before the elections, knowing it would almost certainly cost him the Senate? Well, the answer is simple. Medina let the cat out of the bag at a big progressive conference in Washington, D.C. 3 years ago. I quote him in my book. I have him on tape. He'll be in my film talking about this. He got up in front of the comrades and said this: passing amnesty is the #1 priority of the progressive movement. Did he talk about, giving immigrants a break, the American dream? Not a word, folks. All he said was this: in 2008, Latinos voted overwhelmingly for Obama and progressive candidates. If we stand by these people and get them citizenship and voting rights, they will stand with our movement. That will give us at least 8 million more Democratic Party votes. That will give us a governing majority forever. Think about it, people. Mitt Romney lost by 2.5 million votes. 8, 10, 12, 20 million more Democratic Party votes, people, at the stroke of a pen. The first thing that happens is that Texas will go blue. You take the electoral college votes from Texas, the second most populous state in this nation, add them to the electoral college votes of California, which they already got. It makes it almost impossible for the Republicans to ever elect another president. Ever. one-party state, folks. And if you think the Democrats are arrogant now, what do you think they'll be like with 8 or 10 or 20 million more votes in their pockets and the GOP permanently out of office? Will this country become like France or Germany, as Sean Hannity tries to tell you? Or will it become like Venezuela pretty quickly and Cuba not long after? Because that is their plan, people. That's why they're doing this. That is why Obama granted executive amnesty, because he is a Leninist, people, one step back to get 2 steps forward. He granted amnesty knowing it was the road to the one-party state, controlled by the Democrats, the unions, and the communists. And you have Republicans, people, who tell you this is good for the GOP. What do you call Republicans who sell out their own party and their own country for a bit of campaign cash, folks?
Liberals.
There's a lot of totals for them, people, but none of them are favourable. But I don't want to depress you people with any of that. Because there is a way out. There's a way out of this, folks. I want to go back to 1976. You'd been losing your liberties, Republican, Democrat, for decades. The people were pretty darn disgusted, but they had no option. But that year, a man came out of California who spoke of a shining city on the hill and peace through strength and liberty and the Constitution. And hundreds of thousands of people just like you, the grassroots conservatives, loved Ronald Reagan's message. And they piled into the Republican Party. They thought, we'll get in there, we'll help Reagan get the nomination. And what did the GOP old guard think of Ronald Reagan and his people, folks? They despised him. They hated Reagan. Reagan was far too extreme to be elected. Reagan would destroy the GOP. Reagan was banned from Ohio in 1976 by that state's GOP, folks. They hated him. And they gave the nomination to Gerald Ford. He went up against Jimmy Carter, and Carter won. How did the Carter years work out, guys? Barrel laughs, were they?
13%.
Interest rates up to here, gas queues round the corner, gave away the Panama Canal, gutted your military, Iranian hostage crisis. How bad was that, folks? People said America could never be great again. Can you remember that? But the really important point is this: the grassroots stayed in the GOP and they got angry and they got organised and they took over the grassroots of the Republican Party. When Reagan ran again in 1980, this time they were ready, and this time they refused to take no for an answer. This time they forced the Rockefeller Republicans, the Karl Roves of the day, to give them their candidate. And they got it. And Reagan went up against Walter Mondale, and he took him out 49 states to 1. Shame on Minnesota, people. It was a landslide. The Iranian hostages were back on Inauguration Day, folks. The interest rates went down, the taxes went down, the economy boomed. He rebuilt your military, and he rebuilt the pride in this country, and he took out the Soviet Union without firing a shot.
Yeah.
Any better president in the 20th century? And why did you have a Reagan revolution, people? Because for once it was the grassroots who got to decide the candidate. Think about that, people. The grassroots decided, and you had a Reagan revolution. Well, right now, folks, this country is Jimmy Carter on steroids. And you need Ronald Reagan on meth to turn this around, guys. You seriously do. You've got to gut your federal government. You've got to restore your constitution. You know that. You've got to re-establish your states' rights, folks. You're going to strangle that federal government and drive it down. You know that has to happen. But how are you going to do it? Reagan was a genius. He could unite the social conservatives, the fiscal conservatives, the defense conservatives, the evangelical Christians, the Reagan Democrats, the grand coalition. But right now, people, your base is fractured. You've got libertarians going to vote for Gary Johnson. You've got Tea Party Republicans, moderate Republicans. You've got social conservatives. And you may not have heard this, but some of these groups don't like each other very much. Have you heard a few whisperings along those directions? We are 1 year out, folks, for the most important election in your history, the most important election in world history. Can we afford division? No. We have to beat the vote fraud. We have to beat the media. We have to beat the unions and the dirty tricks. Can we afford to lose any element of our base, people? No. You think about this. There are 90 million evangelical Christians in this country, so-called, so they say. 20 million vote. 70 million do not vote, folks. That is the biggest vote up for grabs there is. But it's more than that. That is the spiritual rejuvenation of this country, folks. Why do you not have prayer in schools? Why is this country turning into a moral cesspit? Because Christians have stayed out of politics for too darn long, folks.
Yep, that's right.
That is the reality. And even if you're secular, can you win without a substantial chunk of the Christian vote? Can you do it? No. So when you choose a candidate, you have to take that into account, folks. And I'm not going to say who I'm for or one or another, but I'll tell you what, there's 2 or 3 leaders right now. 1 or 2 of them can get the Christian vote, and 1 of them's going to struggle. You have to take that into account when you make your decisions, people. And it's not just the vote. I'm not being cynical. This country needs a moral rejuvenation. You all know that.
Right.
You all know that. Why do Christians think they have a responsibility to their families, responsibility to their neighbour, responsibility to their community, and responsibility to their church, but none for their government, which affects their church, which affects their family, which affects their neighbour? Where does that logic come in, folks? Had that view been prevalent in 1776, you will all be still speaking with British accents, and your standard of living would be a quarter of what it is today. That's the reality. But how are you going to get this coalition together, folks? Because you need the Christians, you need the libertarians, you need the moderates. You all deserve representation in your government, folks. So this is what I think has to happen. The most likely candidates that you're going to have right now are Mr. Cruz, Mr. Trump, and Mr. Carson. Probably between Mr. Cruz and Mr. Carson. Whoever your favourite is, just cast that aside and please listen to what I think has to happen. Whoever gets the nomination has got to name their cabinet and run as a team. You imagine, say, Ted Cruz running with Alan West on his VP ticket, and then he names Rand Paul as the Secretary of the Treasury, and he can do what he damn well wants to the Federal Reserve and the IRS. Then he brings Sarah Palin in for Secretary of Energy, and it's drill, baby, drill. Drill in your backyard if you want to. And who would make a great Secretary of Labour? Scott Walker. Right to work in every state, people. And if he doesn't get the top job, imagine Mr. Trump as Secretary of Commerce. EPA, you're fired. OSHA, you're fired. And who would you bring Mike Lee in as Secretary of the Interior? And you know those federal lands out west the federal government think they own? Well, his job is to give them back to those states so they can mine them and farm them for the benefit of their people. And who would make a great Secretary of Health and Human Services if he doesn't get the top job? Ben Carson. End the welfare culture, Mr. Carson. Restore dignity to your communities. Bring in John Bolton, Secretary of State. And his job, Mr. Bolton, your job is to flip the bird to Mr. Putin and the Ayatollahs and to rebuild the Western Alliance. And very important, Ambassador to the United Nations. No one. Bobby Jindal, Secretary of Education. Common Core gone in every state, folks. Gone. Abolish the Department of Education. And if he doesn't get the top job, Mr. Cruz would make the greatest Attorney General you've ever seen.
That's right.
You know, restore justice to this land, go after the vote fraudsters. You imagine this, one of these candidates running with a team across this country, building alliances. Would you be inspired by a team like that, folks?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Would it fire up the base?
Yep.
And would it unify the base? Because the libertarians get something, the social conservatives get something, the defence people get something. Everybody gets a slice of the pie, folks.
That's right.
And aren't you all Americans? Don't you all deserve representation in your own government? Because right now, you play your quarterback, just one quarterback against the whole offensive team of the liberal media. Why don't you play your team against their team? What would the media do if Ted Cruz or Donald Trump or Mr. Carson were running across this country backed up by a team of 20 Rottweilers who are all looking out for each other and not taking any garbage from anyone? How would they handle that? And I think this is going to happen, people. Mr. Cruz has already said a lot of his current opponents will be in his cabinet. Donald Trump's already talked about naming some of them in his cabinet. I know this idea is percolating through, and I think it's going to happen. We've got to do it, people, because we have to win this election, because if you don't, the Democrats are going to keep the borders open, they're going to flood your country with the people from the Middle East, and they're going to swamp your voting base forever, folks. Who thinks they would not do that? They're going to do it, people.
No, the American people will stand up after that happens.
Well, it's already
If they
happening.
win
sir.
next time, this is it. The silent majority has been speaking behind the doors, and this isn't going to happen. You saw what happened in Oregon recently.
Yeah, well, look, I'll
That's a
tell you,
hint.
I want to say one thing, because I think we've got to win this electorally, folks. Because I'll tell you straight, I do not want to see blood on the streets of this country, ever, ever. And I'll tell you another thing. I talked to a militia guy from Georgia, and he said to me, we're going to fight. We're not going to worry about elections. When the time comes, we're going to fight. And I said, well, how many hundreds of thousands of innocent people will die, sir? Who cares? And if you look like you're winning, how long do you think it'll be before the Democrats call in Russian or Chinese troops onto your soil, folks? And he hadn't even considered that as a possibility. Hadn't even got through his tiny little mind that that might happen. We have a chance, the best chance you've ever had to turn this country around peacefully and electorally. You've got the best slate of candidates you've had since Reagan or before.
That's right.
You've got everything going for you, folks. You have to seize this chance.
That's right.
This is the 1 year in your life you have to give everything to politics, folks. And I know what this cost you. I know the time and energy and commitment you put into this with very little thanks. But I'm asking from you for the next year to give the most you have ever done for this country, to give it everything you've got. Because the next year is going to decide the fate of not just this country, but my country. Not just your children, but my children. And I can't promise you much, folks, but I can promise you two things. If you do nothing, your children will live in slavery in this land. But if you give it everything you've got, folks, for your country, your God, and your Constitution, if you give it everything that's within you, you can win this, folks, and you will give your children not just the amazing country that you inherited, but one even greater. Is that worth fighting for?
Yes.
So I just want to say to you folks, thank you so much for what you do for your country, for my country, and for liberty. God bless America, God bless Kansas, and God bless liberty. Thank you very much.
If you have a couple questions, please, Trevor, feel free.